Good afternoon, my sorors of the dynamic and historic Eastern region. It is truly a pleasure to greet you all this afternoon, and thank you all for your attendance. I want to thank our Social Action and Arts and Letters Committee for curating this program, as well as thanks to our Ilyasah Shabazz and Soar Jacque Reid for their time this afternoon to provide us with what I'm sure will be a powerful and informative conversation. I now am going to hand it over to my outstanding co-chair of the Eastern Region Social Action Committee, Soar Patricia Williamson.
Thank you so much, Soar DeBrose. Welcome, everyone. Today, you are going to experience arts in action. The action refers to social action, which is political awareness and involvement, one pillar of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated's 5-point programmatic thrust. As we read about young Malcolm X during this critical time in his life, the political issues of the day are front and center: racism, white privilege, criminal justice. That sounds a lot like today. The delivery of the message is through the arts, spoken word, literature, history. Today's intersection of where the arts meets action is the Red Awakening. The Red Awakening is a collaboration between the Regional Social Action Committee and the Regional Arts and Letters Committee. Malcolm's mother's call, "Wake up, Malcolm," is one for all of us to heed. It is time for us to wake up. I now introduce you to the Eastern Region Arts and Letters co-chair, Monique Fortuné.
Thank you, my soror. Welcome, family, to a Red Awakening in celebration of sisterhood and social justice. I'm Monique Fortuné, co-chair of the Regional Arts and Letters Committee of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. And together with my co-chair, Melanie Oram, I would like to welcome to the stage award-winner, author, educator, activist, Ilyasah Shabazz, and multimedia maven, NBC's New York Live host and award-winning journalist, Jacque Reid.
I don't know if you guys can see me yet. I am seeing the fabulous artwork that was put together. There she is. There's my Sora. Hey, girl, how are you?
Hey, how are you? So good to see you. You look beautiful.
So do you. It's good to see you, and it's good to see you doing well during these troubling times that not just our nation, that the world is in right now.
That's right. That's right. My goodness. But what an opportunity we have right now to make sure that we are instilling the right values in our young people and that they will take us where we need to be.
On my podcast. And then just see what you're doing right now.
Oh, wow. I didn't hear anything. Wait, did you ask me a question? Because I certainly couldn't hear.
Uh-oh.
Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Can you hear me? Okay, you hear me. So did you ask me the first question?
Just how you're doing.
Oh, I am doing fine. I'm happy to be here. You know, it's always an exciting time when I could be with my sorors. I think this is the best sorority organization. And so I'm just so excited anytime I have an opportunity to share with these beautiful sisters.
Yeah, we
How
are
about
in
you?
agreement. You know what? Doing well considering, eager to get my vaccine shot.
Really? Okay.
I was one who was on the fence about it, but now I have to say I am eager to get it. I have been convinced that it would be, better to get it. And if any complications come from that, they can make me well as opposed to dying from COVID.
Ooh.
So that's where I am with it.
Okay.
But it was a journey to get there, but I'm excited to get that, but doing well nonetheless. And again, excited to be a part of this program. As you said, what an amazing opportunity. My internet right now is shaky. So I will just say to the audience, please, my apologies on that. I'm going to do what I can on my end, but we are going to push through and get through this one way or another. So let me get started with this question. And after I ask this question, I may do some doctoring on my Wi-Fi, Sora. But before we get into your book, let's talk about your mom. You're a member of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated. So am I. Your mother joined our sisterhood back in April of 1974 and was initiated through the New York alumni chapter. She then chartered the North Manhattan alumni chapter. And I read somewhere that you said that your mother believed education is the most powerful tool to combat the injustice of systemic racism. And you followed in her footsteps as an educator and joined our sisterhood in the fall of 2020 through the Westchester alumni chapter. How does it feel to be a Delta?
Well, like I said, it's great. You know, one of the things that I'm really happy about is that I have a soror who was not only one of my mother's dearest friends, she was also someone that I grew to love, immeasurably. And she and I both spent our last times together with my mother at the Shabazz Center on Mother's Day. And so she was also my mother's Dean of Pledges. And when my mother was alive, of course, she often bragged about me joining Delta Sigma Theta Sorority. And so I am absolutely so grateful to have Soror Mary Red from North Manhattan chapter. I'm happy to have her love, guidance, and support. And also to be able to participate in crafting the Delta Betty Shabazz Academy for our young girls.
Yeah, absolutely. I love hearing that.
Yeah.
Well, let's talk about you. You are an author, as we saw in that opening, beautiful opening that they did on your bio. That was so well done. You're an author and an educator. Why have you chosen to write books? Because there's so many things that you're so talented, multi-talented. You could do so many things. Why was it, that you wanted to also write books?
Well, I wanted children to be able to open a book and see a reflection of themselves and also learn a little bit about history. And at the same time, it was an opportunity to make sure that I addressed the inaccuracies of my father and his family and his legacy. And one of the things that my mother did, for so long, she safeguarded her husband's legacy. And, the great thing is that young people are now discovering Malcolm, and they're discovering his greatness. They're realizing that, yes, he spoke truth to power. Yes, he was a man of great compassion and wisdom. And so I'm so happy that I had an opportunity to do that. And then also, as an educator, I think that we need a curriculum, an education curriculum, where our young people are clear that African-American history is American history. And if the terrorism of slavery and the subsequent massacres of Black Wall Street, for example, in Tulsa, Oklahoma, are taught in high school US history classes to be as American as the Boston Tea Party, then we know that our children are receiving an education that's based on historical truth and facts, and that we would understand the necessity of reparations, and we would have the opportunity to ensure that we are instilling a value system of truth, honesty, and human compassion. And also, if in world history classes, the truth that Africa is the cradle of the most advanced civilization ever to exist in humankind, and those empires of Futa, Jello, Benin, Ghana, Mali, Egypt got even half the attention that ancient Greece and Rome do, then we would appreciate the present complexity of civilizations in Africa without teaching our children hate and discrimination. Rather, we are teaching them love and respect, not only for themselves, but then they have the opportunity to respect others.
Yeah, I'm so happy to hear you say that, and that is what fuels you and this important work and you being an author. Because if we learned anything, and so many of us knew, but I called, what happened after the tragic death of George Floyd, a racial awakening for so many others, in this country and really around the world that really didn't understand the depths of systemic racism in this country, particularly in the education system, and what children are not being taught. So I'm glad that you specified that as motivation for you. Now, how is this new book, The Awakening of Malcolm X, different than other books you've written? And what tools do you see this book providing to young people?
Well, the US, we spent 80 billion taxpayer dollars on correction facilities, not on education, not on after school programs, but on correction facilities. And in 2012, our incarcerated population increased by 700%. And, at some point we have to address these issues, because this is what's happening to our young people. And we're seeing, indications of these things every time we look on social media and see these horrific killings of innocent lives.
Yeah, we definitely do. We definitely do. And it's unfortunate. There has to be a change. And with a new president, many people are hopeful that we will see a shift. Let me talk about more specifically about your late father. He was assassinated in 1965, yet so much of your work as a writer addressed his legacy. In your opinion, why are so many young people still attracted to him? And not just young people, just people in general, 55 years later. And what is it about his work that resonates with young people specifically today?
Yeah, my father spoke truth, and we know truth is timeless. He is quoted 53.7 thousand times, at least in the summer when I completed this book, 53.7 thousand times per hour per day in social media. And this is the clearest evidence that young people want to know not only the truth of Malcolm, but they want to learn from those who they could employ strategies and tactics to addressing these injustices head on. And my father said it would be this young generation who would recognize that those in power have misused it and demand change, and that they would be willing to roll up their sleeves and, as some people said, take the table and do the work, the necessary work for change, and that change is imminent, and that they would be a part of that process.
Now, in this book, you point out how your father criticized the criminal justice system for exploiting the labor and humanity of inmates. Do you see parallels of systemic racism that the Black community faces today?
Absolutely. That's the reason that he was so passionate. You know, people are now discovering that Malcolm didn't just walk around, you know, addressing these issues, but that he had a profound reaction to injustice. He had a profound reaction to the church bombing of little children. He had a profound reaction to dogs being sicked upon innocent, nonviolent protesters. And so it's Brian Stevenson who says that we are more than the worst decision that we've ever made, that a society will be judged not on how we treat the rich and the celebrated, but how, and I'm paraphrasing, of course, but by how we treat the poor and the incarcerated, the marginalized and the incarcerated. It's up to us, you know, if we want change, and, you know, instead of sitting back and complaining, that we are willing to do the necessary work, willing to control the narrative. And so, yes, of course.
Yeah, absolutely. So I want to talk, you know, about the tragedy that was your father's assassination. Your mother was just a young woman in her 20s. How did she survive that? How did she find a way to move forward? And did she help you and your 5 sisters cope with the loss of your father?
Yes, you know, my mother was, I take my hat off to her because she was only in her 20s.
Yeah.
And it was Valentine's Eve that a firebomb was thrown into the nursery of their home where my mother and father slept as, you know, husband and wife. And the bomb was thrown into, you know, the room where my sisters and I slept. And then a week later, because he was staying at the New York Hilton to keep the danger away from his family, he invited his wife and to bring her children to see him at the Audubon Ballroom, and where the Shabazz Center is today. And, you know, I imagine my mother walked in so giddy and happy to see her husband, and she walked out shattered. But in spite of all of, you know, this trauma that she endured, especially the misappropriation of her husband's legacy, when she knew that he was a kind, loving man, and, you know, and understanding his significant sacrifice and contribution for his people, that she, you know, in spite of all that, she never accepted no or I can't as an answer for herself. And she raised her 6 daughters, you know, with these specific values and with love and kindness. You know, we were raised in a bubble, you know, I always tell people, in a bubble of love. And so whenever I would show up, you know, as the daughter of Malcolm X when I was younger, people were, you know, shocked because they thought that I was not who I should be, right? Because they were misinformed on who Malcolm was, not realizing that Malcolm wanted love, peace, and joy for all children. And that was how I was raised. And so I take my hat off to my mother for having endured all that she did. And in spite of it, still being kind, still being loving, joining this great sorority so that she could continue with the support of like-minded sisters, you know, to ensure that our children receive a proper education, to ensure that our marginalized communities are receiving the support and help that they need, and seeing you know, these young people who are receiving support see reflections of themselves so that they're not feeling inferior. And so, you know, what I'm grateful to my mother is that she made sure that she raised her 6 daughters with a clear understanding on who we are who we were as women, as people of the African diaspora, people of the indigenous first world land nations, and Islam and Muslims. And so we were very clear on who we were, confident on who we are, and that we didn't rely on others to determine our self-worth. And for those reasons, I'm just so grateful to my mother. She loved us unconditionally. And I have to say that I do have 5 sisters because they're all tall, and, and we would never want any, as I always say, anyone to say that Malcolm and Betty only had 1 daughter, but that they had 6 tall,
Right.
opinionated daughters. Jackie.
Well, I want to ask you if you could share a little bit more beyond what you just shared beautifully about your mother, because I'm sure, with her being a role model, that you got to witness what so many of us did not, right? We saw the greatness of her that she shared publicly, but I wonder if there are any, particular stories, and there must be so many privately that you were able to see from your mother that just gives an example of what she instilled in you and your 5 sisters.
Well, let's see.
There's probably so many, hard to choose.
I know. Well, so I have another book, Betty Before X, and usually we, provide that book for the Delta Academy, Betty Shabazz Delta Academy girls. Yeah. And in it, my mother as a young girl just, was a Delta Sprite, which was pretty popular in the 1940s. And she was super excited to become a Delta. But that her mother, her biological mother, was pregnant and unwed and sent south to have her child. Once Betty was delivered, her elder sister raised Betty, her Aunt Fannie Mae. And Betty's mother, Ollie Mae, went to Detroit. When her aunt passed away, she moved to Detroit, and she discovered not only did she have a beautiful mother, but that her mother had a husband and 3 other children. Mm-hmm. And that so she went from being in a single, child household to having all these wonderful siblings. And she was really excited about that.
Yeah.
But then, there were some challenges between her mother and her relationship. And so she was informally adopted by the deacon of her church, and, and had a wonderful childhood and continued her relationship with her biological mother. But after my father was assassinated, and my mother had 6 babies to raise, we were all pretty close in age. She had 6 girls to raise. She went on to earn a PhD by getting in her car once a week in New York and driving to UMass. And till she graduated and had her PhD, we all went there to the graduation. It was so exciting. We felt like we were now doctors also, and we were in the audience cheering. And I remember that day so vividly. But one of the things that my mother did is, even with all of these challenges, and, why I said she never accepted no or I can't as an answer for herself, she founded this educational program for young unwed girls. And it was called Young Mothers Educational Development Program. And it was the acronyms for it was YMED. And those were the acronyms. And it was so that these young girls, if they found themselves pregnant, that their education wouldn't be interrupted, but that they could still go to school. I just thought that was so remarkable of her. They could still go to school. And even because she was so thorough in her work, as most of us most of us Deltas are, that she then was the chairperson, I think, of the Westchester Daycare Council, and had a daycare center so that when these young girls delivered their babies, they had a place for them to have the babies properly taken care of while they continued their education. And so education, was extremely important to my mother, and probably, again, the reason that it has become so important to me. I'm grateful that I grew up understanding my history, having a solid sense of who I am, being proud, of my heritage, because we can't, be told that our history begins in slavery. We have to learn to control these narratives, right? Because when we do, then we understand that had it not been for these refined and industrious African and indigenous people who were enslaved and held against their will and bondage, but yet they were able to cultivate this nation, this land, and turn it into a land of milk and honey, so that every American citizen had the opportunity to call this great nation their home. We would not have that opportunity. And so, again, it speaks to being critical thinkers and also participating, in the foundation that we are providing for our children, and learning to control these narratives ourselves.
The work that you do, which is clearly an extension, a continuation of the work that your mother and your father did while they were on this earth. It is work that so many people that are part of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, that we know it is our purpose within the sorority to improve, the world and the lives of so many people in it, particularly those that are Black people. And I just wonder for you, because this work is, I don't know if for you it is overwhelming at times, because it's a tall mountain to climb, right? To get to the top, to see the change that we are fighting for, that you continue to fight for. And I wonder if in moments, if there are ever moments that you may get a little discouraged, may get a little tired, that if there's anything that you think of or remember from your mom or from your dad that keeps you going, that reinvigorates you and keeps you pushing.
Well, I am a person of great faith, and I definitely got that from my mother, for her to be able to continue as she did. I mean, my mother used to go to these sorority parties and the links, and she would be doing the bus stop, and she would just be dancing and happy and just, basking in her glory and the sisterhood of the women of her friends. And, so that's the kind of woman who raised me and my 5 sisters. Her mother passed on to her this phrase that my mother so often said: find the good and praise it. And that's focusing on the good and not, the challenges. And another thing that my mother used to always say to me, and I hear it like every day that I wake up, and she would always say, Ilyasah, just as one must drink water, one must give back. And so that's just a value system, that is a part of who I am. And so it's believing. I think if we don't believe, then that means that we're not willing to do the work. And I think when we do believe, it's because we have faith in the work that we're doing. When we have faith in God, right? And we have to believe that, serving God, serving our people will eventually yield good results, or the results of truth. When they say truth always rises, surfaces to the top.
Yeah, it absolutely does. It always comes out eventually, right?
It
definitely does.
It definitely.
Well, listen, I do not want to be selfish with you. And, people that are watching this are eager to get their questions and have the opportunity to dialogue with you by sharing their questions. So we're going to move to the audience participation part of this. And I think that those of you who are participating already know how to send your question. I think we've been collecting questions. So I think we're going to go to... Okay, so someone wants to know, what would your father say today in 2021 about the corporatization of prisons? Yeah.
Well, when my father was alive, he was, I have so many, I thought there's not too many things that he didn't do.
Yeah.
And I have all of these papers of the work that he was doing to ensure that the prison population had their rights, especially that they were able to practice their religion, but that they had their rights, their human rights. And he was really big on that. When young people were marching, protesting, demonstrating in the 1950s, it was my father who came along and said, we demand our human rights as your brother. We demand our human rights ordained by God. And so, again, focusing on the humanity of these inmates, focusing on all of these challenges that we are continually faced with, it is really our responsibility to come together and effect the change that not only my father spoke of, but so many countless activists that were fighting for justice.
Yeah, so true. It is so true. Thank you, Karen Wade Culp, for that question. I believe she is a soror. Next question is from Lisa Williams. What would your father say today about how people of color disproportionately are underrepresented or poorly represented by court-appointed lawyers? Oh, this is such a big issue.
It is, and I would like to know what she thinks. It's difficult for me to say what my father would say. What I love about my father is that he was a solution-oriented person. And, before he was gunned down, he spent several months in Africa, in the Middle East, internationalizing the struggle for Black people. He came back, he founded the Organization of African American Unity so that he could take those up on charges for violating the human rights of Black people. I think that it's, when we understand the only way our issues are going to be addressed is by all of us coming together. And so my father often talked about, I'm not discriminated against because I'm a Muslim, because I'm a Christian, because I'm Baptist, because I'm a Delta, because I'm, whatever else. That we should focus on what we have in common, not fall for these divisive tactics, and address the challenges ourselves head on.
Okay, thank you for that. Lisa, thank you for that question. Okay, the next question. How did Soror Shabazz balance her research with creative license to create young Malcolm in this book?
Well, that's my father. I had, lots of stories, again, from my aunts and uncles, especially my father's eldest sister, who I spent a lot of time with before she passed away. And I just remember her telling me all the stories about her parents, telling me the stories about Malcolm when he was a child, when her father, had been assassinated. And let's just talk about that for a moment. Malcolm's parents were young activists. And there's this notion that Malcolm went to jail and miraculously became Malcolm X. Malcolm became Malcolm X because of the values that his parents instilled in him. His father was a Baptist minister. He was the president of the Marcus Garvey organization, Universal Negro Improvement Association, which commanded millions of followers in the 1920s. He purchased land that was reserved for whites at that time, at the height of Jim Crow. He was eventually lynched. His mother, several years later, was eventually placed into an institution. His siblings were torn apart and put in foster care. And then the land that their home was on was taken. And so I think it's important to understand that it is the smart, forward-thinking adults that have to instill these values into our children, whether we've biologically birthed them or not. That we have to be the ones that are raising these children. We have to be the village for our children.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So true. And I don't want anyone out there in this audience to think that I am not paying attention to you. I am multitasking, trying to look for questions and from various sources. So I just want people to know that, that I'm not all over the place. And we are waiting for another question. I have two. Okay, so here's another one from Miss A. Okay, mystery woman. What did you think about the portrayal of your father and mother in One Night in Miami?
Well, I think that we are now more mature, that we can sit and watch a program about these four men, who possessed lots of dignity, right? That Muhammad Ali certainly was not drinking, right? And he certainly wouldn't be drinking behind Malcolm's back. He was serious about social justice. He was serious about his identity. He possessed lots of dignity. And the same thing with Sam Cooke, right? That for him to write a song as he did, A Change Is Going to Come, that he was not sitting around goofing off and playing around. And I think, and the same with my father. I thought it was a great program, but because it was my father, I was a little more sensitive to the character, the portrayals of these characters. And while it was really such an excellent film, these were historical figures who possessed lots of dignity. Malcolm was assassinated. Sam Cooke was assassinated. Muhammad Ali was very serious about social justice. And, he even said, had he not met Malcolm, who was his spiritual minister, who was his advisor, who was his mentor and brother, that his epitaph on his grave would have read, "Here lies the greatest boxer and the heavyweight champion of the world." But because he met Malcolm, it reads so much more. So I just thought that we lost an opportunity to just be more mature about the content that we're portraying, especially of historical characters, that these men possess lots of dignity. And we can only imagine how serious their conversation was.
It's so interesting. Go ahead.
And just that Muhammad Ali wasn't drinking. And he certainly would not have snuck a drink behind Malcolm's back. I mean, they had him, sneaking drinks and doing all of these things. And I can understand providing moments of laughter, audience, being appeasing the audience. But I think that we're mature enough to want to know the depth of a little bit more depth of the characters.
Okay, that's
and what I can also say about my father's mother is she was, she was the recording secretary for this organization. And when you have two activist, conscious, forward-thinking adults, radical thinkers, that you ensure that you instill specific values in your children. And so when Malcolm went to jail, he had the opportunity to confront all of the things from which he was running during his adolescence. When his teacher said, Malcolm, you cannot be a lawyer, right? That's what Malcolm wanted to be. He didn't say, I want to be an artist or a doctor or a musician. He said, I want to be a lawyer so that he can help the disenfranchised. And that's, what he ultimately went on to do, but it's these values and then being in pain and saying that you can't aspire to be these things. It's so much like saying Black life doesn't matter. And our young people finding themselves, running from their identity, not knowing who they are. And Malcolm having the opportunity to discover himself and being the star debater on the debate team in prison when they debated Harvard University, MIT, all of these Ivy League schools, that Malcolm was the star debater. And that when he studied the dictionary, he didn't study the dictionary so that he could learn how to read and write. He studied the dictionary so he could know the etymology, the root words, so he could be his best self by any means necessary.
Yeah, I love that. It's so great to have your perspective on all of that. So we have a lot of good questions coming in. Let me ask the next one. What do you think about the punitive versus rehabilitative models of prisons? This person says, I appreciate your father's use of the library and the debate teams, as you just talked about, to grow in Norfolk, and then the willingness to return to Charlestown for his beliefs. Can you speak on that?
Wow. Yes, that was the one. Wow. That to me just meant so much, So during COVID, I had an opportunity to work with a film director. We're doing a film on my father's story, who was on the West Coast, and a biographer who was working on the same time period. We're all working on the same time period, who was in Japan. And this was like during the height of, we didn't know what COVID was. We didn't know if we were going to live or not, right? We were questioning our mortality. Yeah. And so one day during our meeting session, I had said, guys, I think we're going to outlive this thing, because here we are working on the same material of the same time, and so it can't be a coincidence. So we're going to outlive this thing. But what I really loved about this, and which is what Patrick Parr shared with us, is that while my father was the star debater, I mean, they one time broadcasted his debate on capital punishment through the city of Boston. And while he was the star debater, and he had all of these privileges that certainly were not afforded any of the inmates in Charlestown. And because this particular prison, the Colony, was an experimental rehabilitative prison, that my father opted to go back to Charlestown, rather, take this vaccine, and for principle, but also because he had an opportunity to go back to the less privileged, who had no idea that they weren't just Negroes. And who is a Negro? Where does a Negro come from? You have no identity. But he was so passionate about letting them know who they were, that they had a history, about those empires in Benin and Ghana and Futajello and Egypt, that he could tell them about Wall Street, that he could tell them about all of this great history, of who we were. And so a lot of people don't realize that before then, we had no idea who we were, right? We just knew we were descendants from slaves, and that slaves were lazy and shiftless. We had no idea about their inventions, about their humanity, about the atrocious terror that they endured. And so, it's really appreciating Malcolm and putting him in proper context and understanding his significant contribution. And I would imagine the reason why he is quoted 53.7 thousand times per hour, per day in social media by young people.
I have to, while we wait on our next question, I do want to follow up on something that you just mentioned, this film that you're working on about your father's life. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? Will it be a documentary? Will it be scripted? What can you tell us at this point? Or is it too soon to speak beyond what you've said already?
I'll read a little excerpt from an article that I wrote.
Okay.
The omission of Black, Indigenous, Brown, Asian, and Latinx history is not incidental. These exclusions distance people from their own heritage, their own lineage, and ultimately their own sense of self. A whitewashed curriculum that is not based on truth enforces the myth that there have never been scholars, thinkers, caregivers, iconoclasts, artists, revolutionaries across these various identities. Consider, for example, the ancient kingdoms that were full of immense progress, scholarship, and knowledge. If we learned about them in the same way we learned about ancient Greece and Rome, we would appreciate the present complexity of Black civilization and negate the teachings of biased and inherited hate and insecurity.
Okay. Well, we have another question, and it is, what would Malcolm say today about the continued voter suppression, and what strategies can be done to get more young people involved and active to vote? But if you could start with what you think about, I'd love to know what you think about voter suppression that is still, efforts are still underway to suppress the votes of, poor Black and Brown people across this country. How do you feel about that? What do you think about that? And then share, as Melissa McFadder asked, what would your father think of it?
Well, I think that we would probably think the same. And I just lost my thought just that fast, that, I'm a college professor, and, I teach my students about, and I teach, of course, perspectives on justice in the Africana world. And so we look at the various cases where young people stepped up and stepped forward and challenged injustice, whether it was in the late 1700s, 1800s, up until present day. And talking about the Voters' Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act, that when we understand what actually, or I should say the measures that were imposed to prevent people from voting, then we understand the necessity of our vote. We understand the power of our vote. So I think what's extremely important is to make sure that our young people understand history, that all of this kind of information is included in our education curriculum so that they understand that many struggled and sacrificed so much to vote, that the power lies in our vote. The whole political process, policies, the laws, all of these things should be included in our curriculum, but included from the perspective where we can identify with the content. When we see our people, when we see women, whatever it is, as long as the curriculum is diverse and inclusive, I think that more people, more young people especially, are apt to learn. And we're encouraging our young people to be critical thinkers.
Yeah, which is so important. Oh, go ahead.
And believing in this whole notion of power, possibility, and sovereignty.
Absolutely. Well, with that, we are going to wrap up this conversation, but I do want to say that the world is a better place because you decided to be an educator and to interact with young minds in the way that you do, in addition to everything else that you do, Sora. So thank you for that, and thank you for your time.
Thank you. Thank you so much for taking the time to even, come and interview me and for us to have this discussion that was so long overdue. I am so happy and so honored to be with you this afternoon, and especially to be your soror in this esteemed sorority. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Well, we are going to move on and bring another fantastic soror to the stage. Mississippi native Rosie Allen Herring is the current director of the Eastern region. Now, leader, innovator, motivator, she exemplifies servant leadership. She works tirelessly as she elevates our legacy, our impact, and our sisterhood. Now, before she earned the position of Eastern Regional Director, she served as the co-coordinator of Delta Sigma Theta's Centennial Convention. And those of you who attended know how great it was. It was the largest convention in Delta history. She also held the position of the chair of the Strategic Planning Committee for 7 years on the national board. As the current president and CEO of the United Way of the National Capital Area, she manages an organization with a $36 million budget that is part of a $5 billion network. Her leadership transformed the United Way into a thought leader on equity and impact in addressing education, health, and financial issues. But most importantly, Soror Allen Herring is a woman of faith, and she brings all that she is to all that she does. It is my pleasure to welcome to the stage Rosie Allen Herring.
Thank you so much, Soror Jackie and Soror Ilyasah. I just joined. I know all of those who are sharing in this moment with us, certainly on Facebook and all of our other platforms. This has been a phenomenal discussion. I am in awe. I am totally in awe of all that you are and what you do, Soror Jackie, and the professionalism, having been a fan for years. And Soror Shabazz, our newest soror, we welcome you with open arms, and we are so glad that you have followed your mother's rich legacy into Delta Sigma Theta. So thank you for sharing with us today and bringing that thought leadership to something that is so important, that we find ourselves still, even at this very moment, relying on that rich history and the lessons that have been taught from years to come, from years ago. On behalf of the dynamic and historic Eastern region of Delta Sigma Theta Sorority Incorporated, I thank each and every one of you for sharing your time with us today. This has been exactly a momentous occasion. It is a red awakening, and I encourage all of our viewers and listeners to go out and get this book, to share it with young people, and to go through and share with them their rich legacy and history that we've contributed to this country. Soror Ilyasah, I want my signed copy, so I'm going to buy it and tell you that. Send it back.
You got it.
I want it. And so I do want to thank our co-chairs for this evening. It's the dynamic and historic Eastern regions, Social Action Committee, and the Arts and Letters Committee, because that is who we are. We are social action, and we manifest that quite a few times in the form of arts. And so today, this discussion, this almost fireside chat without the fire, has allowed us to glimpse a little bit more into a family that we believe is an American icon family that we are so happy to have within the midst of Delta. And so, Jacque, we count you, Soror Reid, as one of our icons, and we're so glad to have your professionalism, your great contributions, and your body of work with us as a part of Delta Sigma Theta. Again, I want to thank our Arts and Letters Committee, Sorors Melanie Oram and Monique Fortune, as well as our Social Action Committee co-chairs, Soror Nadej Dubros, who also doubles as our Eastern Regional Representative, and Soror Patricia Williamson, along with their entire committees of both committees, the entire sorors who worked on this, for your graciousness and bringing us to us today. This has been an awesome afternoon. I thank you for being with us. And again, my absolute best to Soror Reid and Soror Shabazz for sharing with us today. Be well, everyone. Back to you, Soror Jacque.
All right. Thank you so much, Soror Rosie. Now, we created this Arts in Action event because we wanted to spark conversation and inspire people to take action. So here are a few things you can do to promote change. Educate yourself and your community on issues. Make your voice heard and let your representatives know that you want to put an end to mass incarceration. Your voice matters. Donate to an organization that promotes the cause of social justice and join local organizations, or local efforts rather. Now, the First Step Act, FSA, passed by the 115th Congress and signed by President Donald Trump, is an important initial step on the road to criminal justice. And we prepared a list of organizations that you might choose to support to promote criminal justice reform. Books to Prisoners, an umbrella organization that mails free reading materials to prison inmates. Equal Justice Initiative, a not-for-profit organization that provides legal representation to prisoners who may have been wrongly convicted, prisoners who have been denied a fair trial, or poor prisoners who cannot afford effective representation. The Innocence Project exonerates wrongfully convicted prisoners with DNA evidence and works to reform the criminal justice system to prevent future injustices. Prison Policy Initiative, a think tank that researches the idea that overcriminalization harms individuals, communities, and the overall well-being of the nation. The Sentencing Project, a research and advocacy center dedicated to reducing the use of incarceration and to address the racial disparities in the criminal justice system. And with that, thank you so much for choosing to spend this time with us. Please take a moment before you go to fill out this short event survey. Have a great afternoon, everyone.